So now that we've spoken about photosynthesis, which is the process in plants to make their own food or to make energy in any case, so then now we have to talk about the process in animals and human beings that we also do to make our own energy. And that process is cellular respiration. Now, cellular respiration can much be seen as the opposite, technically, of photosynthesis. But that's sort of something that your grade 9 teachers or grade 8 teachers once upon a time told you because of the equation. And it's sometimes, because it's the opposite in terms of the equation, it confuses you guys in terms of what cellular respiration really does. And so I want to say from the get-go that cellular respiration is photosynthesis in human beings, okay? Because it is the process that human beings undergo to make energy. But cellular respiration, sometimes you guys classify photosynthesis as plants and cellular respiration as animals. Understand that cellular respiration also happens in plants, in the mitochondria. It is the process that is going to take the food that has been made and convert it into the energy that is needed. So think of in a plant, the plant is making its own food through photosynthesis, and that will happen obviously in the chloroplast. And then it takes that food that was made and converts it into energy in the mitochondria. That is in plants. Now, in human beings or in animals, we don't make our own food, we consume our food. So we don't have that process of photosynthesis. We have the process of taking that food that we consume and making it into energy. All right, so if we look at this chain of energy in human beings or in animals in any case, then we are going to have food that we eat that undergoes photosynthesis to produce glucose. When we eat that food, we consume, say, starch, for example, containing that glucose. So that energy that is stored in starch is consumed by us when we eat. And then that food, that starch that we consumed, is converted into energy that we use for our metabolic processes. So our metabolic processes would be anything that we do, any action, running, eating, sleeping, digesting, breathing, walking up the stairs, listening, etc. A plant also undergoes these metabolic processes, except obviously a plant doesn't walk anywhere. But a plant still has processes that it goes through. So think of a human being, we do breathing and we do digestion and things like that. Plants also still grow. And so they still need energy to grow. And that energy then comes from cellular respiration. So if we have a look at the formula for cellular respiration, the formula of cellular respiration is the opposite of photosynthesis. But that is the only correlation, right? So we say, if we look at this formula, that cellular respiration is the breakdown of glucose in the presence of oxygen to release carbon dioxide and water and energy. All right. So in other words, we're taking glucose, we're breaking it down. We don't need oxygen. We don't need to break down the oxygen. But the problem is we cannot break down glucose unless oxygen is present. So that's why it says in the presence of oxygen. The oxygen doesn't really take or participate in the overall process, if that makes sense. So we are breaking down glucose when oxygen is available. Remember that oxygen we need to breathe, okay? Or we breathe in oxygen in any case. When we breathe in that oxygen, why do we need that oxygen? If you think about grade 10 biology, when you breathe in oxygen. That oxygen moves into your bloodstream. And think of red blood cells need oxygen to survive. So that oxygen is essential for cellular respiration to happen because no process can happen without oxygen, right? So that's why we say in the presence of oxygen. And when that glucose is broken down, it is broken down into carbon dioxide and water. Those two are the main products of cellular respiration. And when those products are made, energy is released. Now, those products, carbon dioxide and water, if you had to tell me, like, for example, when we go back to photosynthesis and I asked you, what is the essential product? You remember in photosynthesis, the essential product was glucose. The glucose was very, very, very important. Okay. And in this case, neither carbon dioxide nor water is an essential byproduct. The essential byproduct is the energy. We are looking for that energy to be able to do our metabolic processes. And so therefore, carbon dioxide and water are byproducts or waste products. Okay. Again, you do not breathe out carbon dioxide because a tree needs or a plant needs carbon dioxide. Just as much as the tree isn't producing oxygen because you need to breathe, right? So just as when we did photosynthesis, we had a look at the chloroplast. So therefore, now that we're doing cellular respiration, we have to look at the mitochondria. And you did this in great detail in grade 9, and then you did it again in grade 10. Chances of us asking you to draw and label a mitochondria, I'm never going to say there's no chance, but it's a much smaller chance that I would ask you to do that. However, you must be able to recognize the diagram and recognize the labels, because if, for example, where you see the word cristae, if I had just put B and I ask you questions on that, you would have to be able to answer. Right, so we look at a mitochondria and we see that a mitochondria has a smooth outer membrane and then it has a folded inner membrane. That folded inner membrane is called the cristae. So the second label over here, folded inner membrane, and this label cristae is the same thing. We are not going to call it folded inner membrane. We are going to call it the cristae. The reason why it's labeled there for you is just so that you can note that there's a difference between the folded inner membrane and the smooth outer membrane. Then we have the jelly-like substance that's inside the mitochondria, which is called the matrix. Inside the matrix, we have the flow of enzymes or the storage of enzymes. And we also have ribosomes. Now, ribosomes you're going to talk about a lot in matric. So we're not going to talk too much about them at this stage, but know that we do find ribosomes within mitochondria. That's an important thing to remember going forward into biology. And so those are the main labels. The one that's important, obviously, then is the cristae, and also the fact that there is another layer, another membrane around the cristae. So if we look at these structures that a mitochondria has and what purpose they serve, then we can talk about adaptations and structural functions. So if we look at the smooth outer membrane, why does a mitochondria have, it wasn't just made like that because, in exactly the same way that why do you have a liver? To be able to do X. Why do you have a stomach? To be able to do Y. We don't just have structures because it looks pretty. Okay. So in the same sense, a mitochondria, every structure it has it for a reason. It serves a purpose. So the smooth outer membrane of the mitochondria is the layer that is going to be permeable to the substances that are either made by cellular respiration or required for cellular respiration. So either allowing these things in or allowing them out. Okay, so it's allowing movement into and out of the mitochondria. Right, so that's important, that it's semi-permeable. The cristae, what is important about anything, grade 11s, if you don't know me, or if you don't want to remember, or if you don't remember much about anything I've ever said, up to the end of matric, or even going further if you study biology in university, anything that is folded is done so to increase surface area. And anything where surface area is increased means it can do more of a specific process. So in this case, the cristae is folded, which is going to increase the surface area of that membrane. If you think about it, if I take a rope and I make a lot of knots and turns and whatever, and I then cut it from its string or whatever, and then I unfold it and I take out all the knots, it's going to end up being a lot longer than it was when I had knots and folds in it. That increased surface area means that more of the requirements and products can be allowed in and out, and therefore more efficient cellular respiration can take place. Okay. Then we've got the matrix, which I said to use like the jelly-like substance inside the mitochondria. So the cytoplasm of the mitochondria that contains enzymes. And those enzymes are important because just as in photosynthesis, do you remember in photosynthesis, we broke up ATP? Do you remember we had photophosphorylation, and we broke the bond between the second and the third phosphate to allow for the release of ATP? We are going to, again, in this case, involve phosphorylation, except in this case, we're not breaking ATP, we're making ATP. So to make ATP, we require enzymes. And so those are the 4 structures of the mitochondria and why they're important to allow for the function of the mitochondria, which is cellular respiration. Okay, so as I said from the beginning, that it's sort of like the opposite in terms of equations. So where you see in photosynthesis water and carbon dioxide on the left, in this case you see water and carbon dioxide on the right. And where in photosynthesis you see glucose and oxygen on the right, you now see glucose and oxygen on the left. Okay, so it's sort of just the opposite, where in the case of photosynthesis, glucose could only be made if chlorophyll and radiant energy were available. In this case, cellular respiration will continue because oxygen is present, and at the end of the day, ATP energy is made, and it's an essential product. Right. So if we look at ATP, and this is going to be a repetition sort of what I've said in the photosynthesis lesson. But if we look at ATP, I told you don't need to know, or you never need to write what ATP stands for. But for those of you who want to know, it stands for adenosine triphosphate. I find often, especially when you go to matric and we learn the word adenine, then those of you who think you fancy and you want to write ATP as a word instead of just the 3 letters, often you write adenine triphosphate. And that's just because your brain has like a correspondence between the two and you get confused. So I find it easier, or think it's better suited, that you just learn ATP, those 3 letters. All right, but when we eat, the energy that comes from that food is used to form ATP. So that ATP is where the energy that we need is stored. Now, if you have a look here, we have the 3 phosphates. Okay, the energy is stored between phosphate 2 and phosphate 3. When we break that bond, we release that energy. Okay, and you remember from photosynthesis, if I have an ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and I then break it to release the energy, then I'm ending up with adenosine diphosphate and a phosphate. So adenosine with ADP with another phosphate. So if you look here, once it's broken, we have only 2 P's, diphosphate and an extra phosphate. Okay. So when we have a phosphate molecule that is broken away from the ATP molecule, we are going to form ADP, and that is called dephosphorylation. All right. Okay, so this little diagram that you see here is probably one of the most, not probably, definitely one of the most important diagrams to study when it comes to cellular respiration. Okay, it's not enough information, but if you can follow this little flow chart, then it's easy enough to remember all the little missing pieces of cellular respiration. While I'm at that, cellular respiration is broken up, or is also called aerobic respiration. Now, we get two types of respiration. We get aerobic respiration and we get anaerobic respiration. Now, aerobic respiration says in the presence of oxygen, whereas anaerobic respiration says no oxygen is available. If you remember right at the beginning when I did the, my brain's not working today, when I did the equation, I said oxygen must be present for cellular respiration to take place. Okay, so cellular respiration is a type of aerobic respiration. If we look at cellular respiration, there are three main phases. Glycolysis is the first, Krebs cycle is the second, and oxidative phosphorylation is the third, and you must know those words. Okay, so there's three phases, and you must know them. In the most general sense of cellular respiration, and it's not as basic as this, we take a glucose, so that remember that glucose is stored in food. Glucose undergoes the process of glycolysis to produce a pyruvate molecule. That pyruvate molecule undergoes the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle undergoes after the Krebs cycle, there is oxidative phosphorylation, step 3. And after oxidative phosphorylation has occurred, we now have a buildup of ATP. All right. That pyruvate gets converted. Krebs cycle, the fact that it says cycle, says to you it happens in a cycle, so it sort of gets renewed and restored. So that pyruvate is what gets converted into our products. And when it gets converted into our products, ATP will be produced. This should make a lot more sense as I teach it. It's also important to note, grade 11s, especially, you're not doing essays obviously this year, but had you had an essay, they like to always include the location of these processes. So this diagram explains or shows nicely that glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm. And that, remember, mitochondria doesn't have cytoplasm. Only a cell has cytoplasm. So glycolysis is still happening outside of the mitochondria, whereas Krebs cycle and oxidative phosphorylation are happening inside the mitochondria. Now, again, I also want to say, I told you that cellular respiration is an aerobic process. But this first step, step 1, glycolysis, is an anaerobic step of cellular respiration. In other words, for step 1, we don't need oxygen. But step 2 and step 3 cannot continue unless there is oxygen. Right? And I'll explain this in greater detail later on. But basically, this is saying to you, you know those times where you haven't exercised for a very long time and suddenly you are made to do a big dance number in major production or run around the field 7 times by your PE teacher. And the next day you wake up and your legs are really stiff and sore. That is a buildup, we all know, we've heard of it, it's been said 1,000 times, that is a buildup of lactic acid. Now that buildup happens because glycolysis happened and there was no oxygen to continue to make energy. So Krebs cycle and oxidative phosphorylation didn't happen, and so we have a very limited amount of ATP available. The reason for that is, if you think about it, when you go when you haven't been exercising for a long time, your organs, your legs, your blood system has only a limited amount of oxygen. Then you go and expose it to hectic exercise, and it uses up that oxygen, and there's no oxygen left. All right. Whereas if you train often, you are replenishing your oxygen. Especially if you've heard of your PE teachers or whoever says you need to do a warm up and a cool down, and those warm up and cool downs include breathing exercises where you are increasing your oxygen intake again, and so therefore making oxygen available for Krebs cycle and oxidative phosphorylation to continue. I will explain this in greater detail, but I want you to know there are 3 phases of cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is aerobic. It must have oxygen. The oxygen must be present for it to happen. But glycolysis is an anaerobic phase. In other words, glycolysis will happen regardless of whether oxygen is present or not. The cycle, or the step 2 and step 3, just cannot continue if no oxygen is available. All right, so looking at glycolysis says the splitting of glucose. Okay? Glycose says glucose, lysis says breaking or splitting. So we are taking glucose and breaking it down. That's what glycolysis says. That glycolysis is occurring, as I said previously, in the cytoplasm of the cell. So it's not in the mitochondria itself. And as I said, it does not need oxygen to take place, which means it is an anaerobic step. Now, glycolysis is going to break this glucose into pyruvate molecules. For every 1 glucose that was available, remember glucose is C6H12O6. So for every 1 glucose molecule that was available, when it's broken down in glycolysis, 2 pyruvate molecules are made. Okay. And we also can call pyruvate pyruvic acid. Now, grade 11s, in previous years, we've done this in like hectic detail, not due to COVID-19, due to actual curriculum cutting. They've simplified glycolysis a lot. So we don't look at the molecular makeup of pyruvate, and we don't look at how these numbers are actually how you figure them out. But what I want you to remember, just so that I know that it's easier, I'm telling you that it's easier, the information that you are going to learn versus what previous grade 11s have learned is going to be easier. However, sometimes I find that when we only give the basic information, it actually confuses you more than explaining it a little bit more in detail. So in this case, I'm saying to you, where I had 1 glucose molecule, when that 1 glucose molecule undergoes glycolysis, I'm now going to have 2 pyruvate molecules. And the reason why I'm telling you that is that for each pyruvate molecule that's available, there will be a Krebs cycle. So that you understand that when I get to the next phase, when I double everything, it's because there's 2 pyruvates now. So I'll explain that just now. So when I have this 1 glucose and I make it into 2 pyruvate molecules, in that process, 2 ATP molecules are made. So we're making ATP, remember, to store energy. So glycolysis, although oxygen is not present or required in any case, we are still making ATP. Remember I said we're making a limited amount. So we're making 2 ATP molecules. So we're still making energy. That's why you can still run when, for example, you haven't exercised for a while or warmed up, etc. So we still have energy, but it's very limited amount. So we're making 2 ATP. And that ATP, it's important for the end to understand the entire cellular respiration process, to know 2, because we're going to add them up eventually. All right. Now, when we undergo glycolysis, we also from our products, we have hydrogen ions. Do you remember the hydrogen ions from photosynthesis? Right? The hydrogen ions will come from water. So we're going to also have hydrogen ions, and we are going to have an energy carrier. That energy carrier is called NAD. I've spoken about NAD before, so it shouldn't seem funny. NAD has nothing to do with the equation. It has nothing to do with anything else. Like, it's not made by glycolysis. It's not made by cellular respiration. It is an existing energy carrier. It's sort of like I said to you in the previous section with photosynthesis. I said, if you know that you need to go to spa now, if you're me, hopefully not you, hopefully you guys don't have licenses and stuff yet, but if I know I need to go to spa, I go and I climb in my car that was there already, that existed, and I go and I drive to spa, and that's the end of that. Okay, the car didn't suddenly materialize because I wanted to go to spa. And if we really wanted to get into a debate about whether my example is accurate, then we could fight about Uber and cars materializing and then you would win a fight with me. So let's not do that. But understand that NAD is carrying energy to help with the process, but it exists. It wasn't made because of cellular respiration or photosynthesis or whatever else. Okay. So if I undergo cellular respiration and I had one glucose molecule, after glycolysis has happened, I now have 2 pyruvate molecules. Those pyruvate molecules are needed for the Krebs cycle to continue. And the Krebs cycle, as you saw previously, happens in the mitochondria. So in other words, I need to move those pyruvate molecules into the mitochondria for the Krebs cycle to continue. And I can only do that if oxygen is present. And so therefore we say that the Krebs cycle is an aerobic stage. So Krebs cycle will only continue if oxygen is present. All right. Up to now, this hydrogen and NAD we haven't used because they're not taking place in glycolysis. They're going into the mitochondria. So we'll talk about them just now. Right, so as I said, the Krebs cycle occurs in the matrix. I didn't say this earlier. I said it occurs in the mitochondria. Now, you must know that the Krebs cycle and oxidative phosphorylation, they happen in the mitochondria, but in different places of the mitochondria. So if you had to just answer the mitochondria, you wouldn't get the answer right because you need to be more specific. So specifically, the Krebs cycle happens in the matrix, in the jelly of the mitochondria. Okay, it's important to know that. Krebs cycle is aerobic. I've said this because it requires oxygen. It needs oxygen to be able to take place. If no oxygen is available, Krebs cycle will not continue. All right. So we have this pyruvate or the pyruvic acid, it's the same thing, that is formed during glycolysis. That pyruvic acid is going to be converted in a series of steps into carbon dioxide. Now, you know that carbon dioxide is a waste product of cellular respiration. Okay, so we're going to have pyruvate that is converted into carbon dioxide. When that conversion happens, we are also going to have NADH that is formed. Remember, NAD is the energy carrier, or the hydrogen carrier in any case, not the energy carrier, carrying hydrogen ions, okay? And we're going to form, and here is why I spoke originally about 2. We're going to form 2 ATP molecules per pyruvate that is converted. So 1 pyruvate is converted into carbon dioxide. When that happens, 2 ATPs are produced. But now remember that happens twice because there are 2 pyruvates for every 1 glucose. So essentially I'm going to have 4 ATPs that are formed from the Krebs cycle. All right. Now, I said to you the Krebs cycle will only continue if oxygen is present. So what happens if oxygen is not present? As it says here, if no oxygen is present, then anaerobic respiration without oxygen, will occur. And in animals, I'm going to do this one first because this was my example. In human beings, where the type of anaerobic respiration that will then occur is called lactic acid fermentation, which means that glucose was converted, but instead of being converted into carbon dioxide, it's converted into lactic acid and 2-ATP. Remember, we said 2-ATP was made in glycolysis. So because oxygen wasn't available, carbon dioxide couldn't be made. So I want you to think logically, guys. If I have C6H12O6 glucose and I end up making H2O and CO2, right? Then it means that the hydrogen ions go to water, H2O, and the carbon dioxide, CO2, also came from the C6H12O6. Now, we're making carbon dioxide in aerobic respiration because we have oxygen. If we didn't have the presence of oxygen, I couldn't make carbon dioxide, so I make lactic acid. All right, and that's what builds up in your muscles, and you only have 2-ATP, so you don't have enough energy to then work off, to breathe faster, to increase your rate and depth of breathing, etc., to get the oxygen that you need to get rid of it. Okay, so you just need to know that if Krebs cycle cannot occur, it's because oxygen is not present. And if oxygen is not present, it is anaerobic respiration. And anaerobic respiration in human beings is called lactic acid fermentation, where lactic acid is made instead of carbon dioxide. In plants, when there's anaerobic respiration, this is called alcoholic fermentation. And that is what happens when glucose is broken down into alcohol and carbon dioxide and ATP. Still, again, only 2 ATPs. Now, think of the fermentation process when we're making alcohol. There's going to be bubbles. I'm sure most of you have seen some kind of brewing process. Those bubbles are the carbon dioxide, and the alcohol is coming from the presence of glucose being broken down. Okay, so you just need to know for me that if no oxygen is present, Krebs cycle cannot continue, and there will be anaerobic respiration. In plants, it's called alcoholic fermentation, and it produces alcohol and carbon dioxide and 2 ATP. In animals, it's called lactic acid fermentation, and it produces lactic acid and 2 ATPs. Okay. If oxygen is present, the pyruvate can move into the mitochondria, where it is converted into carbon dioxide. And for every 1 pyruvate, I have 2 ATPs. Because there are 2 pyruvates, I have 4 ATP molecules that are formed in the Krebs cycle. Okay. Lastly, oxidative phosphorylation. It's really difficult for me to teach cellular respiration that's not on the board. And I will do an extra little lesson on what I would have done on the board with you. But oxidative phosphorylation, I want you to imagine a sort of like a ladder where I have levels. So I have a level, and then a lower level, and a lower level, and a lower level, all the way to the end. Okay. Now, basically what happens in oxidative phosphorylation is that hydrogen atoms are passed along these levels to be able to release ATP. We don't really explain in detail, so we say that hydrogen atoms are transferred, and that's all we basically say. Or we say that they passed along the electron transport chain. You do not have to at this stage in grade 11 explain that in great detail, but understand that basically hydrogen ions are bounced off different levels to then accumulate to produce ATP. Oxidative phosphorylation occurs in the mitochondria. I said this from the beginning. However, I said you need to be specific. So in this case, it's along the cristae. The cristae being the folded inner membrane. The hydrogen atoms that I'm talking about are carried by the hydrogen carrier NAD, and they are transferred along the electron transfer chain to produce 32 ATP. Okay. When those hydrogen ions are transferred along the electron transport chain, in the electron transport chain, just imagine a sequence of events. Okay, so imagine, let's say, for example, that you want to buy your friend a present, but you can't, in this time of COVID-19, you can't get to your friend. So you buy it and you pass it on to another friend. That person passes it on to another person, who passes it on to another person, who passes it on to another person, and each time there's a transfer of hydrogen ions. So every time we're passing it on to the next person, the next level essentially, we are transferring hydrogen atoms. We then say that the final acceptor is oxygen. So your friend who's getting the gift is the final acceptor, the person that actually receives the gift. In this case, the gift is hydrogen. So we're passing this hydrogen like a broken telephone, passing the hydrogen along until it gets to the person that it needs to get to. In this case, the final acceptor. And in the case of oxidative phosphorylation, the final acceptor is an oxygen molecule. If I'm passing hydrogen along until it receives or is received by an oxygen molecule, I want you to think H, hydrogen, O2, oxygen. Then when oxygen receives hydrogen, it's going to make water. And water is a byproduct of cellular respiration. So if I had to word oxidative phosphorylation in the best terms for you, I would say that it occurs in the cristae or along the cristae of the mitochondria, where hydrogen ions that are carried by the hydrogen carrier NAD are passed along a series of acceptors until the hydrogen ions are received by the final acceptor, which is oxygen. When the oxygen accepts or receives the hydrogen, it will form water. Okay, I hope that made sense. So when we started off with glycolysis, we had glucose. That glucose, when oxygen is present, will be equivalent to about 38 ATP. So I want you to see where the 38 came from. We had 2 from glycolysis. We had 4 from Krebs cycle. That's 6. And we've now made 32 in oxidative phosphorylation. So that's 38 in total. Okay. This used to be way more involved, and I'm not going to even go down that road with you at this point. I don't need to, because they cut it out of the syllabus in any case. I used to like to do it in any case so that it made it a bit more sense. But what I will do is when we are back at school and able to, I will rather show you this in person. So you need to know 2 ATP from glycolysis, 4 ATP from Krebs cycle, 32 ATP from oxidative phosphorylation. So that means, guys, most of our energy is coming from this third phase of oxidative phosphorylation. All right, and what was essential during cellular respiration was making ATP. Okay, so this diagram here, we have glucose. Glucose will undergo glycolysis, step 1, phase 1, in order to make 2 ATP. After glycolysis, so glucose will be converted into pyruvate. If there is oxygen present, that pyruvate will undergo the Krebs cycle. When it undergoes the Krebs cycle, 4 ATP will be produced. After the Krebs cycle, it will undergo the this says the electron transport chain, but the phase is called oxidative phosphorylation. And in oxidative phosphorylation, we have up to 32 ATP that are made. So we have 2 plus 4 plus 32, which makes 38. And this side is aerobic respiration. If we have glucose that undergoes glycolysis to make pyruvate, we're going to make 2 ATPs still. But if there's no oxygen present, then that pyruvate cannot move into the mitochondria. And so therefore we're going to have either lactic acid fermentation or alcoholic fermentation to produce lactate or lactic acid in animals, or alcohol and carbon dioxide in plants. So this side shows me anaerobic respiration. Okay, so we had our equation. Glucose is broken down in the presence of oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water and 38 ATP. So let's just look at that. Where did the glucose come from? It came from the food that we ate. Where did the oxygen come from? It comes from the oxygen that we breathe in. When that oxygen is available, we can continue the process of cellular respiration. And so therefore, in the Krebs cycle, carbon dioxide is made. If I ask you where did the carbon dioxide come from, it came from the conversion of pyruvate. So pyruvate was converted, and one of the waste products was carbon dioxide. What happens? What is the fate of that carbon dioxide? It is released into the atmosphere. When I breathe out carbon dioxide. The second product is water. Where did that water come from? It came from the process of oxidative phosphorylation. Hydrogen was passed along a series of acceptors until it found the final acceptor, which was oxygen. And when hydrogen was accepted by oxygen, it formed water in oxidative phosphorylation. Throughout this process, I had made 38 ATP molecules. Okay. We said that cellular respiration is aerobic, therefore it requires oxygen to completely break down glucose. Remember, it will still break down, glucose will still break down without oxygen, but it will only break down partially. So aerobic respirations, it needs oxygen to completely break down glucose. We have 3 steps of cellular respiration. The first step is glycolysis, which happens in the cytoplasm, where glucose is converted into pyruvate or pyruvic acid. That pyruvic acid then is converted in Krebs cycle and in oxidative phosphorylation, and that happens in the mitochondria. It's important to know, again, what I said, matrix for Krebs cycle and cristae for oxidative phosphorylation. So in other words, at the end of all of this entire process, grade 11s, one glucose molecule makes 38 ATP molecules. All right. If there is no oxygen present, then it is called anaerobic respiration. I've said this. So no oxygen is present, which means glucose can only be broken down partially, not completely. Anaerobic respiration will happen in the cytoplasm. Remember, if there's no oxygen present, then the pyruvate that is made in glycolysis cannot move into the mitochondria. So therefore, one glucose molecule will make two ATP molecules. And we said the two types are lactic acid fermentation in animals and alcoholic fermentation in plants. Right. In animals, lactic acid fermentation means that the glucose that we had was converted into lactic acid. It's important to note, grade 11s, that this is reversible, okay? If I go and do a cool down exercise and keep exercising, so let's say, for example, I'm very unfit and I've run around the field, but tomorrow and the next day and the next day I do a little bit of exercise again, then I'm able to take that lactic acid and convert it back into glucose in order to recover. All right. In plants, when there's no oxygen available, then we're going to have anaerobic respiration called alcoholic fermentation, which means that the glucose is converted into alcohol, ethanol, and carbon dioxide. Because carbon dioxide is lost, this process is irreversible. Okay, we can't undo the process. And so if we look at alcoholic fermentation, this is, for example, when we add yeast into bread dough to make bread, and when we make a whole bunch of our alcohols through the process of fermentation, like wine, for example. We can't undo the making of wine. When we have a buildup of lactic acid in our muscles, it causes that pain, that like tired, sore pain in our muscles, that wet stiffness of walking. Okay, and it's because of the buildup of lactic acid. When lactic acid moves to our liver, it can then combine with oxygen to form glucose again. So that's why I said it is a reversible process. When we have oxygen available again, we can transport that lactic acid back to the liver, where it will combine with oxygen, and we undo the process of lactic acid fermentation. Okay, this is usually we just give this to you as self-study, but alcoholic fermentation obviously will involve making of things like bread dough and beer and wines, etc. And that would be from alcoholic fermentation, so anaerobic respiration in plants. When we have anaerobic respiration happening, we are going to release carbon dioxide. So as I said to you, the bubbles. So think of when bread is being baked, there's always some like little holes. Think of a loaf of bread or a slice of bread. There's like little holes amongst the bread. Those are from where carbon dioxide was released. And when we're making any alcohol, we have bubbles, we have froth in beer, for example. That is because of carbon dioxide that was released. And remember I said, if carbon dioxide was released, the process cannot be undone. So alcoholic fermentation is not reversible. Okay, I'm going to leave this lesson at that, and I will do another lesson with you on practical investigations. I hope that you have a good day going further, grade 11s, and that hopefully the fact that the matrics are back or going back to school, and you will maybe hear a couple of stories from them as to the measures that the school has taken. I hope that will ease your minds into going back. Obviously, all the teachers are excited to see you and get back. I'm sure although sometimes you feel that school sucks, and all those, getting up in winter sucks and blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, I know all of you would actually like your matric certificates. And so I believe in my heart that most of you are looking forward to get back to school. And we look forward to having you. Teachers are also full of sitting at home, if you didn't believe that. I do also, just towards the end of this lesson, or because it's the end of the lesson, and I always say stuff to you at the end of lessons, for those of you who listened this far and who maybe perhaps didn't know this, I am actually pregnant, and I will be having a little girl in October. Because of my pregnancy, obviously, I am more at risk than any normal person for COVID-19. Because of this, there is the consideration that I might not be coming back in my full capacity to Bryanston High School at this stage. But I want you all to know something. I have spoken to Mr. Skelton, and I have extensively put plans into place. I might not stand in front of you every single day and teach you, but you will be taught biology. And this obviously goes then for my classes, but I will do my utmost best to keep you where you need to be. I will still be setting all the exams at the end of the year and all those kind of things, even though I'll be on maternity leave. So I don't want you to stress. And I feel like from the most of you who have actually gotten back to me about these videos and whether they've been worth it for you or not, most of you have said that they have worked well. I do believe in my heart that they have worked well. So we will continue videos like these with informative information, and I will do pre-recorded lessons with you. And I want to try and maybe make afternoons where I come in and see you, where the rest of the school has already gone home. And I know that means you have to give up an afternoon, but at this stage, it has to be one of the options that we have to look at. I have to, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, but I have to look after this tiny little baby growing and be safe. But I also deeply love all of you, some of you, most of you, sometimes. And so I feel that I'm responsible for your teaching and your education, and I don't want to just pass you along to another teacher who hasn't taught grade 11 before. I don't want you to end up with somebody, not that I'm saying that teachers don't know what they're doing. 100% don't believe that. But I also know that, even those of you who are Miss O'Brien's kids, you have spent the last 2 months with me and listening to my voice and listening to my teaching and becoming accustomed and used to my way of, I don't know, even if it's just the stupid way that I joke or the way that I explain things. I don't want you to be bounced off to another teacher, especially in the wake of the confusion of going back and how things have been. So I promise all of you, even if I'm not standing in front of you every day, you all have my WhatsApp number. I will be teaching you some way or form, whether it's a video, whether it's whatever, but you will be learning. And then just to finish off, I hope that you all had a good week. You obviously had the week off last week, and I hope that you used that to catch up, because every single one of you should be on par with where we are at this stage. I should only have to go back and do revision, and that shouldn't take me very long. I am not going to be able to be going back grade 11s to re-teach information. That, with your curriculum, is just not possible. Even though they've taken a few things out of the curriculum, it's not enough to just carry on and do everything all over again. All right, so I do hope that most of you have used this time wisely, and if you haven't, that you will do so before the 6th of July, because once we're back, Oaks, this train is on a downward path all the way to the end of the year, and you need to be on that train. I really want you to be on that train with me. Okay, that's the end of my voice. Good evening.